So I'll call to order the meeting of the Environment and Natural Areas Committee on June 12th at 7:25. And I want to acknowledge that we're on the territory of the Coast Salish people and our near neighbors, the Shannon people. This month is, of course, Indigenous History Month, and I was honored this past weekend to be invited to participate in the Changemakers Gathering Festival in Langford. It was put on by, as a collaborative event, put on by the city, Indigenous communities, Indigenous knowledge keepers, nonprofits, sports teams. There was quite a crowd there, local business and community members. The event was designed to honor and celebrate Indigenous peoples and culture. I held down a booth with Peter Ord from the Habitat Acquisition Trust, and we were there to show our support in the district, Habitat Acquisition Trust and Pearson College, for the Shannon First Nation and their decision-making around the Mary Hill lands. The festival was a safe place to learn, share, and grow, and it was a real pleasure to be there. So we have on our agenda tonight a number of things I wanted to, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of the pink correspondence from Bev Bacon.
So moved.
Thank you. Moved by Mayor Little, seconded by Councillor Shukin. Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. So we're going to start this evening. Welcome back Steve Roddick from Pinna Sustainability. I hope everyone remembers Mr. Roddick, who's been here before working on the Metchosin Climate Action Plan. And this evening he's going to present the final plan, and we're looking for comments, corrections, ideas, anything that's missing, and adjustments that we might make between now and bringing it to council once any changes are made. Mm-hmm. May I hand it over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Tonight I'm going to keep it brief and do an overview of the process, a couple key parts of the structure of the plan, and the plan has been made available to council. I'm not sure if it's been made available online yet or what the process is from here, but we'll be speaking to some of these points here.
Yeah, it's been available for people to look at in the agenda package.
Great. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Roddick with Pinna Sustainability, and I'll be speaking today about the District of Metchosin's Climate Action Plan.
Public participation. Okay.
The project scope for this Climate Action Plan began with a focus on mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and was expanded to include adaptation. So thinking concretely about the climate risks that are relevant for Metchosin and preparing and responding to those risks. And then between those two, there are certain types of actions that fall into this area of low carbon resilience, where you're both reducing your emissions and you're mitigating some of the impacts of climate change. And as is phrased here, mitigation is largely avoiding the unmanageable, and adaptation framed as managing the unavoidable. In terms of our process, the basic steps were to begin with a review of regional policies, data, plans, information relevant to climate change planning. We developed a greenhouse gas emissions inventory based on CRD, the Capital Regional District's methodology, and preliminary mitigation actions. When we expanded the scope of the project, we went back and did some additional research and analysis of climate change impacts of concern and developed preliminary adaptation actions to prepare and respond to those based on both the preliminary mitigation actions and the adaptation actions based on a number of different sources of information and viewed through a number of different lenses, including feedback from the community, the science around climate change impacts in the region, what other best practices are emerging from other municipalities of comparable size. And using those, we began with this preliminary list and whittled it down to a few priority action areas. Outreach and engagement, as I mentioned, we've reviewed and integrated feedback to refine these preliminary actions, and now we have this draft climate action plan presenting to you tonight. In terms of the engagement process, we had a council workshop back in September of 2022, a community survey in February and March of 2023, a second workshop with council in April of 2023, followed by a MIASC meeting that evening in which additional feedback was provided. And we're currently in we've had staff review the draft cap, and we are working now with council today to present this draft and talk about where we've landed. In terms of community greenhouse gas emissions, This is the breakdown of community emissions from Metchosin based on the Capital Regional District methodology. As you can see, transportation is the biggest part of this, followed by buildings. There's also a large component that is sequestered emissions, which is a significant amount of emissions sequestered, but noting that's not included in the CRD's methodology. So it's identified, but it's not counted. So it's not accounted for. We've taken that data and looked at a number of provincial policies, federal policies that are intended to reduce emissions over the coming decades, and projected these forward in terms of the impact of that provincial and federal senior government actions to identify what the gap is between the current emissions trajectory for Metchosin and what additional climate change actions might help to further reduce the emissions footprint to align with provincial targets and federal targets. And what we're proposing in this plan is a 2030 target of negative 40% from 2007 emissions levels and a carbon neutral target for 2050. These targets were pegged at these levels to align with the provincial targets, which was the precedent set in the previous OCP as well when the prior target was established. And also looking around at some local municipalities, some comparable municipalities, Colwood, Souk, Highlands, for example. Colwood has a 30% target by 2030, Souk 50% by 2030, Highlands carbon neutral by that date, and then the 2050 targets are carbon neutral for the province, net zero for Colwood, net zero for Souk, North Cowichan a bit further far is 80%. So just doing a bit of a look around to see what other municipalities around the area are doing. Moving on to actions and responding to both emissions and to the climate impacts of concern for the region. We identified 5 areas of action. There are many ways in which you can slice the pie of what types of actions you take and how you organize them, but we landed on these 5: land use, agriculture and waste, climate risk reduction, buildings, transportation, and community engagement. And within that, we have 10 goals. Well, I won't go through them all now, but each of them has a small number of priority goals to focus action. And then for each of these goals, we've identified a short list of priority actions. For each of these actions, we've tried to do an estimate of when this action could occur in terms of the time frame: short term, medium term, long term. So is it the next 1 or 2 years, the next 3, 4, or the next 5 years? And a 5-year plan being it's a common length for a climate action plan. A lot can change in 5 years, so it's good to revisit it at that increment. In terms of the cost of some of the actions, we tried to make an estimate of, is it $0 to $5,000? Is it $5,000 to $15,000? In the $15,000 to $75,000 range, or over $75,000? And that's speaking with staff, trying to identify what's a large amount of money for Metchosin, what's a manageable amount of money. It's different for every municipality, but that's where we landed in trying to estimate how expensive some of these actions might be. And then also in terms of staff resources, looking at the full-time employee equivalent of how much effort it would take staff. 1 star being less than 10% of 1 FTE, 2 being 10 to 25%, 3 being 25 to 75%, and then 4 being 75 to 100% of at least 1 employee's job in a dedicated capacity. So through the plan, just to give a snapshot, I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is essentially the table where we've landed for each of these climate action areas. So this is looking at climate risk reduction. We have our 3 goals on the side, and we have 5 distinct priority actions. And for each of them, we've identified a timeline, estimated investment, and estimated staff resources. And it's important to note too that those estimates are rough. You know, the details will be determined as it's brought forward in the budgeting process and through the strategic planning process, and what that looks like for Metchosin in the particular context of how that would be implemented may evolve. And just to note, we have these priority actions identified, but also there were a number of additional actions that emerged that are some pretty good ideas that we wanted to make sure were captured, And we have an appendix that identifies for each of these action areas a number of additional opportunities for action. This is climate risk reduction, for example, and also land use, agriculture, and waste, a much broader category, also has a broader number of additional opportunities. So looking at implementation of the climate action plan, 5 action areas overall, 10 goals, 17 priority actions. We have these estimated timelines. Multiple priority actions are already underway. There's progress been made and plans to further advance some of those actions. And as I mentioned, the detailed resourcing will be determined on an annual basis through the budgeting process. It's proposed in this plan that it be a 5-year plan, so reviewed every 5 years, ongoing reassessment and iterative climate action planning. And this is something I tried to emphasize last time, but this is the beginning of a path towards climate action, and that path will evolve, and Metchosin's needs may evolve over time, and its capacity may evolve as well. But this sets us in a direction where there are concrete actions in place in order to progress this work. In terms of the evaluation process, moving forward, it's envisioned that the next iteration of the CAP will identify more specific metrics for evaluation for the goals. It's important to strike a balance between a municipality's or a district's capacity to do the evaluation and set up goals that are meaningful, and also that they're not so burdensome that staff are spending more time tracking the action than actually doing the actions. So this is intended to give some time to think through some of those goals and the metrics that could be used. So in terms of next steps, Council reviewing and confirming targets and priority actions were 2 things that I identified as wanting to make sure I got some feedback tonight, and also any other feedback on the plan obviously would very much welcome that, and any other comments we receive on that would be very much welcome. And then from there, updating and finalizing the climate action plan, and then it will come back to Council for adoption. So I'll leave it at that. Questions? Anything coming up for?
Steve, I think what we'll do is we have a little bit of a formality to go through some minutes, get them passed. Then we'll have some public participation because the public have looked at it, maybe get those thoughts, and then we'll jump in with Council if that's okay.
Yes, excellent.
For everybody? Thank you. Great. Thanks very much. And thanks for all the work you've done with this along with Catherine Organization and Planning. We'll just jump back then to the agenda of public participation. Is there anyone who'd like to speak right now with the Environment Committee public participation? Thanks.
Bev Bacon, Metchosin resident, and you have my comments in a pink, and I'll give a copy to Pinna because I imagine you haven't seen what I've got to say yet. Anyhow, I will go through this, what I've written, and then I have another new idea. So that I like a lot of what's in there. I like going back to CRD and saying, hey, you should give us credit for our carbon sequestration. What I would add to that is that we should have a special consideration that a lot of people don't think about is the carbon sequestration of our grassy fields. And what I've written in here is what I've learned, that our hayfields, our grassy fields, our grasslands actually count as high or higher than the trees because of, that's what they're saying in California, because the trees burn and release carbon into the air. And as far as the grass goes, the carbon is stored in the roots, so it's still sequestered. So there's 2 things: go after CRD to give us credit for that, and have grasslands acknowledged as good for carbon sequestration. I like the target of 40% reduction of greenhouse gas by 2030 and net zero by 2050, and I agree that this is predicated on having limited population growth and well-informed residents. And I think we can actually be more ambitious than that. And that's the idea that I'm going to give you last. Can't you just wait for that, eh? I support the actions to solicit external funding for new habitat protection and restoration projects. And we can't get Fire Chief Dunlop to do all our grant applications, so we should identify somebody that specializes in grant applications, and let's go for the federal money, the provincial money, the regional money, and find somebody who's brilliant at writing grant applications. I support leveraging land acquisition funding to purchase more land to be designated as protected areas, and we've got this aging population, and some of them are sitting on beautiful land, and we need to chat them up about their bequests and what they're leaving behind. And I think we should actively be seeking donations and bequests, specifically for land acquisition, because the way Metchosin is in our OCP is Metchosin can all be chopped up in 5 and 10 acre lots. They don't provide for larger chunks of land. So if we want to keep our forests, largely they're private, and we have to be able to buy them when they become available. So we need to have a kitty for doing that. We need a war chest. And if we have any municipal property that's not high value for conservation, we should have that land sale ready, so that if we have an opportunity to acquire something, we can sell something that might be better suited as a residential property in order to get the chunk of forest that we need, or the chunk of wetland that we need. I like the idea of having renewable energy generation on the new fire hall, thinking solar panels and heat pumps. I'm sure that's being thought of. I'm making the assumption that there will be a new fire hall. I guess that's not a done deal yet. And I support the initiative to have and to enhance groundwater conservation by rainwater harvesting and efficient irrigation. And I think we could benefit from a seminar or a presentation on that topic. Maybe get Gord Baird to come. He knows a lot about that. But we could bring in some expertise and make it a little easier for people to do rainwater harvesting and efficient irrigation. I agree that we should look into belonging to the Canadian Federation of Municipalities in relation to the benefits of grants available. I read that we're not a member right now, but it could be advantageous because there's money.
Just punching our time.
Okay, a couple more. The writers give Metchosin credit for its tree management bylaw 287. In my opinion, we shouldn't have a lot of credit. It's not that great. We need to revise it. And the writers give Metchosin credit for its rainwater management bylaw 467. That needs to be revisited as well. It's not as good as it could be. Am I out of time now?
We're running tight. Why don't you come up with your big idea?
The big idea, okay. The big idea is, what do you know about zero carbon step code? I bet nothing, because I don't know anything about it either. But I copied something for you, and I know who knows about it, who would love to come and do a presentation for you. So I am part of Metchosin Climate Action Team, that's MCAT. And we come under the umbrella of SICAN, which is South Island Climate Action Network, and Jane Devonshire is head of that. And she would like to come and do a presentation on brand new, hot off the press, zero carbon code, which would, other districts are looking at that right now, and some are actively pursuing it, some are mulling it over, but be part of the team. And I know at least 3 out of 5 of you said you want to be climate champions. So I copied something for you to give you a little bit of information. And I'm hoping you'll go for it, and maybe we can even be more ambitious in our targets.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Beth. Anyone else like to join in public participation? Okay, great. So we've just got a couple of adoption minutes. We've got minutes from Environment and Natural Areas Committee May 8th to look at. Would someone like to move adoption of those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Shoup and seconded by Councillor Epp. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, on page 4, you have under reports, biodiversity resolution for the 2023 UBCM convention. Will you be presenting this in person this year at this convention?
I would hope to, but I guess we've got to get ourselves organized.
Okay, I know the registration's like happening as we speak, sort of thing. So, okay, good to know.
Any other questions or comments? All right, we'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Carried. And then we have receipt of minutes from the Environmental Advisory Select Committee, NEASC, from May 24th.
Move receipt.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Shoup and seconded by Councillor Epp. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Carried. So now we're back to the draft report, the District of Metchosin Climate Action Plan, heading towards the final report. And I wonder if anyone would like to start off with comments about that or ask questions. Steve's here to respond as needed. Yes, Councillor Shoup.
Councillor Gray, I do have a question or two for Steve, Mr. Roddick.
Perfect.
So, Steve or Mr. Roddick, could you talk about some of the methodology behind the land use emissions sequestration target you have, or sort of the figure you have, and some of the things that like what goes into that, and particularly do CRD parks, has that been built into our number?
Should I speak from the microphone?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shoup. In speaking with the CRD, my understanding is that the methodology for not accounting for, but calculating carbon sequestration is looking at satellite imagery, and then based on that, identifying roughly what the landmass is, what type of flora they're looking at, and then using a baseline figure for that type of flora to estimate, if it's grasslands, if it's forest, if it's a road, they can come up with a number based on that, just at a grid system. And that is one of the reasons that it's not accounted for, is it's a very rough methodology for doing that. My understanding is that is the methodology that's applied through the CRD as well.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
And I could mention that I've raised this last week at the CRD Climate Action Task Force, and I think there's some interest in this right away. I mean, people are realizing that the question that we've struggled with, or we've talked about here, about do we want to leave Metchosin undeveloped? Answer yes. How do we get credit for what we've got here? And people are realizing at the CRD task force, sort of agreeable in the sense of, we need to recognize that in order to balance the question of what the land use is like out here if we're going to maintain those forests. So started the discussion, let's see where it goes. But the same comments were made, by the way, Councillor Shoup, just about it's a rough measure, so I think that's why it hasn't been there before, but I don't know totally the story. I had a question, Stephen, or maybe to council, but the 5 years. 5 years seems like a short time, but it seems like a very long time in the climate question, and whether we should review the plan sooner than that. Mayor Little.
Yeah, I had the same thoughts because it's not a long time. Our municipal cycles are 4 years, except for the climate's warming very rapidly, and it seems to be on a different trajectory than we had appreciated. So I think it would be wise of us to reduce that time.
Mm-hmm.
I had that written down here.
Maybe what we could do is mark it as a 5-year thing, but come back at this in 3 years or before we're done our term. Would that make sense, or would that please the council? Okay, let's do that.
I was saying through the chair, I was just saying that I think it would be wise of us to, at the midpoint, to reassess this,
Okay.
make sure we're on track, see what's fallen through the cracks, because things will inevitably fall through the cracks, and sort of reorient ourselves. And of course, with our strategic planning that we're going to happen at least yearly, twice this year, then we'll also reevaluate these, and so we'll get in the habit of keeping this in mind, and through that lens, making decisions.
Okay, that sounds great. Councillor Shukin.
So thanks, Councillor Gray. The thought that goes through my mind with this plan is that so much of it is going to be local action oriented in terms of making it real and live and useful in the community. So some of that is bound to change, I almost think, on a year-by-year basis. So for example, there is a movement in the community now to look at invasive species a little bit more aggressively, and thanks to your work, Councillor Gray, to kickstart that. And part of that work, though, is to encourage people to adopt areas where they can go back again and again to go after those invasive species. So things like that, where you're doing an educational campaign which may morph over time. So that kind of thing might find its way into something like our strategic plan that we come up and do on a yearly basis. The other part of the climate action plan, though, is the inventory, the carbon inventory, and I'd be curious to know what the time frame for assessing that is, because I think a lot of the data for that is drawn from the CRD. Yeah, almost entirely. So, Steve, any understanding of when the next sort of wholesome data would be coming out of the CRD? Or?
I believe it's coming soon, but that's Steve. Perfect.
No, it's you.
All I had was I think it's coming soon, but I'm not sure the date.
My understanding, just based on the timing of the previous assessments, that it should be coming in the next 2 years. I'm not sure when though, because we were looking at, was it 2018, and then 2020 is the last one. So if that's I guess that's a 2-year time difference. But I'm actually not sure as to when they plan to do their next update. But I understand and agree that it's not something that makes sense for Metchosin to pursue on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll get a solid number on that. Councillor.
Well, I guess the thing I found confusing was the Table 1 community energy use and greenhouse gas emissions provided. It said this figures were adapted from the CRD. The last one was 2018, so that's 5 years ago. And I actually don't really understand how the CRD would come up with these figures, and again how you would adapt them. I mean, just for example, like on-road transportation, like how can you possibly know how many vehicles are electric or gas operated or diesel or propane? Like I don't really I just wonder about how these figures actually, how valid they really are.
As mentioned, I have reached out to some folks at the CRD to ask about what their methodology is for some of these areas, because some questions came out of some of our previous workshops, and for example, they speak directly with Fortis and understand how much natural gas is sold in the area, and so it's going through the supply chain largely to understand how much fuel is coming into the area or how much vehicle ownership. CRD also does some surveys and additional information trying to understand transportation-related emissions from driving. But this is the kind of level of complexity that, it's a lot of capacity, and it's also not as fine-grained to feel satisfactory when you look at it, I think. So I think it's good to keep raising questions and try to understand where these figures are coming from and whether they make sense for a small jurisdiction like Metchosin.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I can see the initiatives are great. I just think that how we can actually measure things is a little odd.
And it's evolving as well. They may update their inventory methodology in the next iteration, and the figures may change as well as a result of that.
I'll get some more information on that too. The group that I'm part of on behalf of the council has only met twice. that since I've been involved. And the first was an introduction meeting, and the last one was a bit more serious. But they're just starting off in terms of all the new councillors who've joined on.
Councillor Gray, just on Councillor Epps' comments about measurement, I would almost expect in some ways it would be a little more difficult in a way to measure a smaller community's footprint in a way. Because if you look at the big carbon, considerations that a local government would have, its transportation, its buildings, and its municipal services. And we don't do garbage collection here, like municipally anyways. Don't run a landfill. So yeah, there's some kind of weird almost gaps in terms of where you would go for data or how you would model the data. So yeah, it's a strange one, I think anyways, but observation. So.
Yeah, I think you're right, Councillor Shukin, and what's happened is they've settled on a methodology that'll keep changing and adjusting as things get better.
Yeah.
Mayor Little.
Yeah, so in order of priority, we mentioned the transportation, buildings, and then solid waste in those areas. And regarding transportation, some of the priority actions were to lobby upper level governments, including BC Transit, for more options to reduce cars on the road. But the second one, the EV chargers, actually that's probably an easy fix. We had talked last term about different partnerships. There's been a lot of talk, really no action. That's probably been about 3 years, 2.5 years that those have been sitting there. And really, maybe we should reassess that and go and talk to the two groups that now have that infrastructure on their property. One of them is our property. Ask them if they would turn it on and send us a bill, and that would be about 2 hours worth of work. And we could make immediate change now without a great amount of effort. The infrastructure's there. They're level 2 chargers, both of them. Maybe that's something we should do. That would be something that we could actually tangibly do.
Maybe I can respond to that. I think you're right about the lobbying the government, for example, in the Regional Transit Commission for the vehicle kilometers traveled distance, the targets of the provinces put out there. The rapid bus and more complete lanes, so that can be dedicated lanes, transit on demand. Those are 3 ideas that have come forward through this process that we could be pushing for. On the EV chargers, our planner, Ms. Leishan, has been talking to the CRD, and there's been a big grant request gone forward, and they're very hopeful they'll receive it. And we have the funding for 2 chargers would be coming to Metchosin as a result. But I'm planning to bring that back to council at our next meeting, next environment meeting. What isn't clear to me is exactly, well, did they get the grant, yes or no? And if they got it, then we'll have the funding provided through this big grant. I think it's through the federal government. The second option is for us to do, as you say, and just have a private company come in and put them in. But I thought if we get it funded through a grant, that would be the most advantageous. And it seems as far away as the fall was when the money would be available if it does come through. And I guess not telling stories out of school, but they're quite hopeful. But I don't know the answer to the question. So it looks like that'll be here soon, or at least we can choose one or the other depending on our own finances. It come up. I had a different question, or maybe a comment. I want to thank Deb Bacon for her note here. One of her last points is about extreme weather events and preparedness, and I had talked also to the CRD climate group just about the issue of, well, where is the dividing line between forest fires and climate change? Where do our climate plans go? And their suggestion was that we keep them separate. And I think that probably fits, fire chief's here as well today, but the idea that there's responsibilities in the fire department and emergency services for emergency preparedness, disaster planning, and that sort of thing. And those efforts need to keep rolling. And then our climate plan is about other forms of mitigation that we can do, and in fact encouraging and being appropriately supporting the work on the disaster planning, emergency planning side. But it's an interesting division that we don't want to lose the disaster preparedness side of things, and it may in fact become more and more important as time goes on. But whether we call it climate action, whether we call it being responsible in terms of our preparedness, I'm not sure. But that maybe is a discussion we can have as time goes on. And just highlighting it because it came up for me a few times, and it's in that's letter tonight. And then I guess I know the fire department's involved in at least the community wildfire, the resiliency plan, extreme weather assessment, and response plan, and then so those things are part of seems to be the climate change troubles that we're facing. There is a question also that was raised by Doug. It's also in the report that was prepared, and that's about the Canadian Federation of Municipalities. And I don't have a recommendation to make tonight, but I think it would be good for us to, and I'm happy to take it on, to research a little bit, what are the costs to do that, and what are the kind of grants that are available, and then come back to council with a question to say, well, should we make that move or not? I think there's lots probably in it in terms of other benefits, but there's a certain, they're managing a lot of the federal grants coming forward for climate. And so it may be the kind of thing where you put a little bit of money in and there'll be a positive return, although that's not guaranteed. Mayor Little?
Yeah, I did contact them a couple of weeks ago, and it's about $1,200 a year. And it's not a lot of money to leverage a lot of OPMs, other people's money, and to get access to all of the grants that are coming out. I think would be well worth it, as well as the advocacy. I think it would be a great idea.
Super. I didn't realize that's not too bad a bill. Well, I'll prepare something on that and bring it back with a bit of information so we can reach a decision. Okay. Any other comments or considerations? Councillor Schutten?
Thank you. I have two specific edits, both interestingly occur on page 6. Just in terms of the title of this section, I might suggest it be retitled to Risk Reduction from the Impacts of Climate Change, as opposed to Climate Risk Reduction. Just says a little bit more. And in terms of very bottom, box 2.3a, which states investigate and report to council on opportunities to enhance groundwater conservation. I would also add protection, groundwater conservation and protection. And one of the realities of the aquifer that serves so many of us is it's volcanic rock, so it's very porous. It's been described as low productivity, highly vulnerable because it doesn't have that filtering layer of gold or whatever sand. So if there's a contaminant, there always is contaminants, of course, but it tends to go right through. So great. And
thank you.
Unless there are objections from the...
No, sounds great.
So.
Other thoughts or comments right now? Mayor Little?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the investigate the development of a waste gasification facility for the district. I'm wondering if that would be appropriate for Metchosin and where that came from, and if you could speak to that.
Certainly.
This was an action item that had come up originally in some of our research into what some of the other municipalities were doing to address the issue of emissions from waste. And I may be misremembering, but was it discussed at the MIASC meeting as well? Was this an action item that came up that evening?
I think it came up there, yes, as one idea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the origin of that, but it's not a small undertaking either. So which is why the action is framed as investigate what that would entail for Metchosin. Mm-hmm.
At the MIASC meeting, there was one participant in particular who was interested in this idea of paying attention to the technologies that are out there, and that we should not miss the boat if something comes along that's useful. That's practical, maybe is a better word to say. So I think this fits in that category of things to keep our eyes on, and if it turns out to be something worth pursuing, great. If not, not so much. Mm-hmm. And I think your point about are we the right size is a good question. So some of the things in the report we can get onto and act, and others are more, well, let's check it out and come back and kind of look at, maybe it's a small example with the Canadian Federation of Municipalities membership. Let's check it out, see what it's worth, and come back and do something, yes or no. A little.
Yeah, because it sort of conflicts with our OCP. Our industrial is written, it's a very small component of our official community plan. It's about a half a page actually within the whole report. And so it would conflict with that. And I would just, I'd like to proceed cautiously with that one. I know there are many countries in Europe that do it, Denmark, and they use their facility as a ski slope in the winter. Actually, they're building. Saw it myself, and but I know that there's controversy here in the South Island regarding biosolids and gasification, that kind of thing. So I would want to proceed cautiously.
Yeah, I have a question mark beside it myself already. But the list at the end here is, we want to be, and I think Steve's done a good job being inclusive of many of the comments that we received, so we don't miss anything that was offered. Some of them may be quite attractive to us and others not so much. And it's really a question of not missing them or losing the thoughts as we move along. And maybe some of them will move into our actions right away. An example of that would be, again, Bev raised tonight the issue of the zero carbon step code, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in my councillor's report, where I've also heard about it recently and gotten interested in that as a possibility for us. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, I just have one other question. Thank you for your report and your work, Steve. Regarding the metrics, how do they identify, do they not include the Salish Sea as a carbon sequestration source? Because we've got all this coastline, and one would think that that would also be a significant carbon sink, but I didn't see that anywhere in here.
That's an excellent question. My conversations with the CRD were largely around land and sequestration from land within the district. We didn't discuss what the Salish Sea and its relation to carbon sequestration, or how it was or was not included in the inventory. It may be because of territorial boundaries. I'm not totally clear on the extent to which Metchosin's jurisdiction extends into the sea or in different places, or how the particular boundaries of particular places apply, but that's a question I could follow up with to get a better understanding.
Great. That seems like it for now. I want to say thanks so much, Steve, for working on this. We've got a few ideas here, and perhaps you and I can talk with Ms. Alicia and sort of finish up the work, and some of the commitments I've made too I can chase down, and we can work together on making sure we got all that tied up.
Excellent.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. That's great. So the next item on the agenda really was my council's update, and in fact the first one was Pinna Consulting's work and Steve Roddick's work, and I'm glad that we've been through that together. And the second item really was that zero carbon step code. So maybe we've gotten an information sheet here from Bev Bacon, which folks can take a look at. But when I went to that meeting I referenced a moment ago, the CRD climate group, I learned about this brand new initiative of the provincial government called the Zero Carbon Step Code. So what was going on is that the BC Energy Step Code, which is a different item, we last council meeting, I guess, we committed to get on that, and that was mandated by the province. So we were on to step 3 of that code. Step 4 and 5, I learned at that meeting, and my learnings are cursory, so that's why we've been asking staff about it to get a bit better, make sure we got our understanding clear. But what it sounds like is the investment that you make in step 4 and 5 gives you very little benefit in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, it's focused on the final parts of insulation and those sorts of things. And it's not, the zero carbon step code is the idea of moving to electrification, basically. Not natural gas, dropping that and going straight on to heat pumps, as opposed to gas and then something else. And so The province has said, look, if any jurisdiction would like to proceed in this way, that's the same move, I'm using the words electrification, but move that direction instead of fossil fuel heating for new builds, you're welcome to do that sort of ASAP. Victoria and Saanich have both now committed to do that, and there's some interest that the South Island would do it all together. At least that's in the advocacy group side of things. But there seems to be some benefit on the builder's side too, because then everybody's kind of get together now, okay, these are the new rules for working. So what I wanted to do was, and I mentioned at our last council meeting just when we were going through minutes, that I had asked at an earlier meeting if, when we went to step 3, could staff investigate step 4 and 5? You know, what's that look like? Big benefit for us? Yes or no? In the meantime, I found out about this new item on the scene, and so I just wanted to revise and ask staff to touch base with the CRD Climate Action Program, find out what's going on there, and come back and give us an idea about the advisability of making this step forward. And then Bev's made give us an idea tonight that perhaps we could have a presentation by Jaden Devonshire to tell us a bit from a public advocacy point of view. So 2 things there. One, so does that sound reasonable? Any questions about that? Very little.
Yeah, I like the idea of the zero carbon step code. I'm just wondering, practically speaking, when we have a number of residents heating with wood stoves and with propane, how would we handle that? Yeah, well, the step code, the idea of the step code is for new builds. So this is different than the retrofitting side of things. And but to your point, people say, gee, what about, I want to do something different here. The fear of, well, wait a minute, we're going to have a power outage, what are we going to do? So I think most of these builds might well have, and this is what I'm not sure about, but you want to have a backup, either built-in generator or a wood stove, I expect. Something to give you auxiliary heat in the event of a difficult time. As many of us have at the moment. We have a wood stove, other people have generators and that sort of thing. Councillor Shukin.
Councillor Gray, thanks. You know, I wonder, I meant to ask this question of Mr. Roddick when he was here, and I wonder if I could do it right now. Mr. Roddick.
Go for it.
Is the burning of wood still considered carbon neutral? It long has been, and I believe it still is, but is there any change to that you're aware of?
I know it's a big discussion. From a carbon accountability, how it's accounted for, it's technically still carbon neutral, is my understanding. But I know that's an ongoing debate because it depends on many factors about where the wood comes from.
Yeah.
In particular.
And probably I don't know, the habitat destruction that might come from bringing a tree down there.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we can make this into a motion, but the Environment Committee asked staff to touch base with the CRD Climate Action Program and report back on advisability of adopting zero carbon step code in place of moving to step 4 and 5 of the BC Energy step code. Basically getting some more information. Would somebody like to move that motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Shukin. And seconder, Councillor Epp. Any further discussion on that? Very much a learning point.
Yeah, I'm more interested I'm more interested in learning more about this. I don't know if I want to jump on it right away, but I think it would be really good if staff could bring back more information for us. Thank you. Thank you.
A little.
Yeah, I just did a perusal of the website, and in particular Central Saanich. They have I think it's called Hello Central Saanich BC Energy Step Code, working towards a climate leadership plan. And I thought maybe even in conjunction with staff reaching out to CRD, if you could reach out to your counterparts at Central Saanich, View Royal, North Saanich. They've all are at one stage 2 or 3 with the step code, and see where else they're heading. Not that I don't want to be a leader in this, but I'm just wondering what other people are thinking regarding the zero carbon step code.
Yeah, will do. I think that would be good to have an idea of the status of the different CRD districts. As I say, I think In fact, I think Victoria went even, they had put it off for a year, and now they've brought it up and are going to it in, I think, November. And I think some a date soon as well. So it's moving, and just knowing where everybody else would be quite useful to us. Just a sense where it's at. Great. Okay, so did we vote on that? All in favor? Carried. And the other question was, would we like to have a presentation by Jane Devonshire from the Climate Action Network? Would people be open to that? Anything about that? At a council meeting, or should we have it back at an environment committee meeting?
Back here.
Okay, we'll have it back here at the environment committee meeting. I'll offer an invitation out to Jane for that. So the next item I want to talk about is invasive species removal. And I guess I have a confession to make. I used to think that invasive species removal was kind of people's hobby. Various people I know were out doing it and getting together. And I think it perhaps has turned to a hobby, but it's also a social activity. But by gosh, it's such an important thing that's going on out there. And so just in my report here, I wrote down that English ivy's been removed from the community hall a few weeks ago. The Metchosin Invasive Species Cooperative is working on Taylor Road and the property there, removing a big amount of holly. It'll be there for a stretch, I believe. Work continues to remove field bindweed from Morley's Meadow. The group there taking care of that. Black knapweed treatment. Today's Monday, I think it was happened today at Tower Point. The CRD is involved in that. In the park itself, so they're dabbing the plants, and then along with our public works doing the ditches. And then in the past week, Jenny Eastman and myself and my wife Janet, we delivered letters all around the area there to homeowners to give them the information about the knapweed. I'm happy to report that everybody that we saw, all the doors that we knocked on to give them the information about the knapweed and about the program, people were very positive. So it was a really, and lots of positive comments, by the way, about public works here in the district. So that was very nice. So this is June, and thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson, for getting this going on the Broom Bash. I guess that had been in advance for a number of years, and a big thanks to Gloria Lejour with Fire Smart at the fire department, and our fire chief, Stephanie Dunlop. We've got things going, and people are out there working on the broom right now. And anybody who's interested, the residents can contact firesmart at metchosin.ca and for chipping and removal of neighborhood broom piles from now until June 30th. And then I think you mentioned Kathy Atherton, Councillor Donaldson, who's excited about Tansy Rankwort season coming up. May has been the province's invasive species month, and July is starting on July 1st is Metchosin's invasive species week. And so people may have seen the article in the last Metchosin News by Kathy Atherton, but she lays out just the idea that if you're seeing the plant, the flowers should be deadheaded, put in a bag and sent to landfill, and then the plants themselves can be pulled up and just left on the ground, but not in grazing areas, because I believe it's poisonous to the animals, particularly horses, and I think other animals, sheep maybe as well, livestock generally. And you can see those, for anyone who's interested, on the Metchosin district website under community and then environment and wildlife and then invasive species. So there's pictures there for everyone to look at to get the idea. There's also, in line with the broom removal, on June 19th from 5 to 6 p.m., Gloria Lejour from the Fire Smart side of things at the fire department is holding a session, a workshop at the Habitat Acquisition Trust on Ed's Lane off Liberty Drive. And it's a workshop just about how to remove broom, what to do with it, sort of the technical side of it. That's 5 to 6 p.m. and everyone's invited to attend. So that's invasive species. It's more than a hobby, it turns out. Councillor Donaldson.
I have a question. So in the past when we've done a broom bash, and I know this is definitely not the year to be doing it, but we've had people leave them on the side of the road, and then Public Works would come and they would do a little burn or whatever. Yeah. We're not doing any of that, of course, for obvious reasons. And cutting it and taking it to the municipal site here before it goes into seed. I understand that. So I was always like, oh, you never move it. So I've learned that this year, but one thing I haven't learned is when you take ivy down and you cut it off the trees, and you bring it here and you're gonna chip it, I'm assuming that's what we're doing, is that right? There's a difference with that plant because there's a lot of roots, so start chipping that. Are we gonna have a lot of ivy growing out on the grass here, or how are we managing that? That's what I really want to know.
I don't think so. What's happened is that it's all being treated as a invasive species and brought to Ireland, and so there's a special, basically goes into a dump there.
So it's not being chipped?
It's being chipped here and then brought there, as my understanding. Fire Chief Dunlop could comment.
Very valid point and concern. Some of the stuff doesn't actually get chipped. It's very hard to chip ivy, so it gets removed, and when they take all the chips away from the broom or whatever other debris is there, they remove all that as well. And then when it's fire season again, after October 31st, we'll do a good burn of that area.
Right.
So and further to the broom, we are actually, if you can coordinate it through your pods, we will come to your site and remove those piles as well. We're asking people to not stack it on the roadside. It has to be on private property and coordinated with pod, and then we'll bring a chipper out there as part of the Fire Smart program to remove all of that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I saw a contractor the other day working on the pile, and I didn't see them separated. But anyway, a ton of stuff went into that chipper, and it's all cleaned up, and they came back later, it was all gone. I hadn't realized, but there you go.
So were you able to dig it out at the base of the fence?
Yeah, we pulled a lot out. There'll be some on the property of the landowner next door, but he's interested in the whole topic, and we made a big headway there.
Yeah, it looks great.
But it's the kind of thing you go back to, like so many other of these invasive species. Making headway, I guess.
Start.
Great. So the next item really was to tell folks we've got another report to comment on from Trans Mountain. So Trans Mountain, the pipeline company, is doing all of these, meeting the environmental assessment office requirements of the provincial government. So the latest one we got, or maybe it's the second latest, I have another one to tell you about, which isn't in my report here, provided before the meeting. But this one is for Environmental Assessment Office Condition 38, and it's about human health impacts. And so the fire chief and myself, we've looked at the summary document, but we have limited expertise to comment. Now it's kind of because we're a small place, of course, and we're getting these this is a massive report with zip files and all that. So the topics that are covered are things like bioaccumulation in country food. So the idea that it's getting into food that Indigenous people would traditionally eat. They're concerned about breathing in fumes, so respirology kind of problems, the toxicology of the products, and then even in fact mental health, psychology and psychiatry effects of big spills. So there's a lot there, and I'm not sure that, well, MEASC, the Environmental Advisory Committee, doesn't have the expertise to deal with this. We've raised it there and said nobody's got the background. But I wondered if people had other ideas. I mean, one way to respond is simply say this concerns us, and there's a few things there that I can certainly comment on. It's all kind of concerning, but it's hard to be, I'm not a toxicologist or have that kind of experience or health research person. But I wondered if anybody knew other people who might be involved or help us with that, or if we should just prepare kind of a response that's more or less saying, thank you for your report, we can't really follow up. So I was really wanted to bring it here before I prepared a response like that. Councillor Schuppen.
Yeah, I do have somebody who I might recommend to you, and I'll do that sort of privately and might check in with her first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody has an idea, July 24th is the due date, so there's a little bit of time. So I've been a signal it here, but if anybody got a notion, I know when we were doing some other work, there's a comment that we do have lots of people with expertise. So anybody knowing about that would be a help. The way that they did this was to have, or they created a report, and now they're seeking response to their report. And the way they did it was to imagine a spill, I think in the middle of Burrard Inlet, and then the impacts on people around. People all around there and at certain distances. And so initially when you read it, it sounds like it's not too harmful, but then you get to the evacuation protocols and things, so it seems like, oh, maybe it is a bit of a problem. And I know we're concerned about that here in terms of spill response on our coast. Okay, well, if anybody comes up tonight, I'll follow up with Councillor Schuster, that'd be great, thank you. And then I'll either come back with a kind of a mild response or let people know that we're not in position or otherwise. While we're on the topic, we got another request from Trans Mountain for condition 39, and that's existing shoreline conditions report. And MEASC has begun to take a look at that. And what this report is about is the idea of they've picked, I think, 5 points, 4 or 5 points between Vancouver and here, Race Rocks. To fulfill the requirements, they want a complete study of sort of life and zoning and property ownership and a whole lot of different questions around these points, 500 meters on either side of a point. Now you might think, well, don't we want that information everywhere if there's going to be a spill? But for whatever reasons, it's designed in this way. It's just, we've just started looking at it. The report is due by June 19th, so we're not going to make it. We just got it, but we're not going to make it, and I was hoping that we might, if committee was favorable to this, I might just jump on it and send a letter seeking an extension. We've done that previously through council, Mayor Little, but our timing is kind of tight to get it to council, and it's just to seek an extension. Or I could ask for your help to do that, one or the other.
Yeah, sure. I haven't seen it, so
it's just this question.
It's the same. They're asking us to comment on that as well.
It's a big report with a whole lot of information. And when I've had the assistance, particularly of Gary Fletcher, Mary Lee Hohen, and Andy McKinnon have all started looking at it, and it's just a big job to get it done. For a few people and spend much time on it. But if that was okay, maybe you and I can coordinate and we'll get a letter out. Great. And then we would like to respond to it. It's just that one we're able to. It's just more of a time crunch. The other I wanted to let just in terms of an update, developing a shoreline spill response alongside the Shannon First Nation. I talked to Mary Little about this, but I did spoken to Chief Dunlop, who we're hoping would lead the exercise, and she's agreed to do so. And I had a word with Chief Chips, and he also said that's a great idea. This isn't something that will happen tomorrow. It's more one that's on the fire chief's list to get to, and we'd be working together with the Shannon Nation in terms of how we would respond in the first hours after a spill. So our fire department gets a notification. Even that question of getting notifications need to be sorted so that we're confident we would hear soon. And then as the chief says, fire chief says, we have that golden hour, when things are just starting to happen. And if we get a sense of where the oil is coming, we might be able to do something from the shore as compared to the people who are working on the ocean. So that'll be underway in time, and we can come back and report on that when more is happening there. Then I wanted to report on just some information I've been gathering about. In our strategic plan, we have the idea of developing watershed and aquifer protection strategies. And so I attended a meeting of a stormwater group with the CRD. And at that meeting, I learned that the CRD has a stormwater quality monitoring service. And I mentioned it when the CRD came and presented a few weeks ago. Metchosin is not part of it, and part of the reason we're not part of it is we don't have big stormwater, storm drains, going into the ocean, which of course Victoria has, and Esquimalt and other places. But we do have Bilston Creek, and we have Beach Creek, and we've got quite a few smaller watersheds going into the ocean. Bilston Creek being the third largest in the CRD. At any rate, did get a price back for that. To join up would cost about $31,000 a year. For twice yearly testing of Bilston Creek and maybe another couple of watersheds, basic health parameters, 5-year testing for metals and other specific contaminants, source tracking of contaminants, spill response, that's if spill happens in the creek, as compared to the spills we were talking about a moment ago. And then they do some education, that sort of thing. So when I got the price, I think I'd mentioned again, Mayor Little, we mentioned it, and I said I have to get the price first. I got the price. It's a bit of money for Metchosin. But in speaking to the same group at the CRD, they said, tell you what, we'll have a word with the Bilston Watershed Habitat Protection Association and may be able to work together with them, and they have these arrangements, I guess, with the Peninsula Stream Society and others, where they it's that whole, I guess, similar to invasive species, volunteers take a big part of this kind of work, and CRD may well be able to support those. In addition, they are prepared to do testing high up in the watershed in Langford and at the bottom of the watershed at Woody's Lagoon. So I'll keep working on that, and I just wanted to let you know about that in the background in terms of an update. And then just another issue, Mary Little says the Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention Fund materials from the federal government, and me taking a look at that, and we're hoping to be able to put forward, we've got a variety of ideas, and we'll bring that to the committee and see what might make sense. We've talked everything from, gee, if I can remember now, bullfrogs was one. I think goldfish is another. We had some goldfish in some places in Metchosin. And then there were, oh golly, well, it slipped my mind. There were two other ideas down down near Woody's Beach. So we'll come back to council with that, or to this committee with that when we get there. And the final item was just Marilyn Honan brought my attention to an article in the newspaper about Lyme disease being here, and I guess possibilities of getting worse. And just to let people know summer's here again, so it's good to protect. And there's a link here, and you could put something on the website about that. The district, just for everyone to really be cautious. Lyme disease is a terrible, terrible problem if you end up having it. And if you do get a bite from a tick, it's important to remove the tick and then seek some medical attention, and you may get some treatment for preventing the advent of the disease itself.
Councillor Gray, I find you barely audible.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
And your voice trails off.
Oh, I backed away from my microphone. Well,
did.
Patty, I apologize, and everyone else, excuse me, and those online, I apologize. I was just putting a plug in for being careful about being bit by ticks, and to be cautious at this time of year. Okay, so those were all of our items, and under reports, correspondence, we received the correspondence from Bev Bacon, which I answered a little bit, and I think we've responded to. And we have no other correspondence, bylaws, or other business, so I take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We've got it over here from Councillor Donaldson, turn the other way, and we'll second from Mary Little. And all in favor?